leave them in the S&P 500, and the S&P 500 is at all-time high. You take them out, and it's in a bear market. Those companies mean so much to the overall stock indexes. And that's a sign of the end of a cycle. When the leadership of a market is so narrow that it's literally something you can count on two hands, then that's the end of the cycle. And this time it's narrower and more richly valued than it was in 1999. So we basically, while we weren't looking, a new tech bubble blew up. That's the biggest tech bubble of all time. So that means the bust will be commensurately huge when the time comes.
You're listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, where you get valuable information you just can't find anywhere else. To thrive in today's trying times, you need the Financial Survival Network, now more than ever. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and get your free newsletter and gift. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.
And welcome. You are listening to watching the Financial Survival Network. I'm your host, Kerry Lutz. Hey, we're back from beautiful Thailand. I'm going to do a special Triple Lutz report on it, tell you what I found there, why you might want to think that there are other places in the world where you could possibly live. But the big news this week, and to me, it is the biggest story that, of course, the media is more or less neglecting because it doesn't fit into the narrative, is libertarianism on the move in Argentina being implemented successfully thus far. John sent you that article. In Argentina, Milei took over, I think, less than 2 months ago. Argentina hadn't had a balanced budget in over 12 years. It went from deficit to surplus, a $600 million surplus, which in a country the size of Argentina is substantial. I guess he had to break a few eggs to make that omelet, but libertarianism has gone from what you and I talked about as just being a theoretical system where we know that things would probably improve to actually being implemented, and we're starting to see the fruits of it. Almost cause for optimism here.
Hey, Jerry, welcome back. And you and I as kind of sort of libertarians walk around for most of our lives, not saying what we really think in a lot of ways, because if we say what we would really like to have happen, it just sounds crazy to normal people. Like, okay, close down the FBI, lay off half the government. That's the kind of stuff libertarians say about. End the Fed, and there's no reason even to say stuff like that in the U.S. by and large, because most people just hear that as a cry for help from
the figure eight state.
Yeah. But here we are in Latin America with two different countries enacting the kinds of things that libertarians only dream about. In El Salvador, they made Bitcoin legal tender, and then they rounded up all the gang members and just put them in a supermax prison. And so El Salvador went from being one of the most dangerous places in Latin America to having one of the lowest crime rates. And now in Venezuela or Argentina, like you said, this new guy comes in, he's a libertarian, and everybody thinks, okay, well, that'll last a matter of weeks before he gets shut down. Well, he fired half the government. and it doesn't sound like the government is in chaos or anything. It sounds like stuff is still getting done, but he's not paying those people anymore. So now the government is running a surplus. So these are heavy duty, big deal kinds of things to have happen in the world, just because so few things like that have ever happened. And see, Vivek Ramaswamy running for president here said something like, okay, on day one, we fire 75% of the bureaucracy. And everybody assumed that was just a no-name candidate trying to generate a little bit of heat so he can have more than 3% in the polls. But suddenly, that's something that's demonstrably possible because it's being done in other places in the world. So all of a sudden, I still think, obviously, we built up all this debt. We're headed for a financial crisis on a vast scale. But the fact that before that happens, because when we're at the very bottom and we're trying to rebuild from the rubble, lots of experiments will take place. But now, before the big crash, we've got people experimenting in interesting ways. And I think that's very hopeful, because if it works, then all of a sudden it frees quasi-libertarians out there to start saying what they really think. And maybe some of these ideas become politically marketable in the U.S., Ron Paul got a few votes by saying end the Fed. Vivek Ramaswamy got some votes by saying we'll close down the FBI and the education department and fire 3/4 of, nobody took it seriously, but it made him noticeable, and he got some votes. So now that these things are actually conceivable, that makes it a more interesting political platform, because maybe you can actually do it, Cool.
Who would think? I mean, really, the paradigm, it's totally anti-libertarianism. It's anti-personal freedom. It's anti-economic freedom. All of these things. And yet, here we are, and people are actually doing it. And is it perfect? No. We're not trying to get perfection here. But I think that the knowledge, so the mises of libertarianism in terms of free markets, is that prices are the most effective communication tool that we have. And when you have unlimited participants in a market and the price is being set freely, the market allocates resources more efficiently than if the government has, than if Russia has a guy at the bakery, the communist bakery, allocating bread, saying, all right, you get 1 loaf, you get 2, you get 3, that it works better. And now we're actually getting the opportunity to prove the thesis, right? And I don't know if we're so dumbed down that people won't even know nirvana when they experience it, as close to nirvana as you get, right? But this experiment is really exciting.
Yeah, it really is. It's fascinating to watch. And see, we in the last, let's say, decade or so, maybe a little longer, we've seen some guys come along who have kind of opened the Overton window in American politics, where there's more stuff you can talk about as feasible now. And Ron Paul did that to an extent, but he was way ahead of his time. And Trump comes along with a basically America First populist platform, which both the Republicans and the Democrats thought that was just absolute lunacy.
Yeah.
But he comes in, and all of a sudden, 40% of the population will vote for something like that. And now all of everybody's thinking, wow, okay, maybe, building that wall can really be done. It's not just a campaign slogan, and maybe bringing our jobs back from China is an actual possibility. Things like that have become legitimate goals now, instead of just campaign slogans that you're going to forget about the minute you get elected.
Right.
And then the stuff in Latin America is kind of adding to a list of things that you can cobble together into a somewhat libertarian political platform. So this can't be good. I mean, there's no guarantee that the stuff that's being done now succeeds. But the fact that it's being tried and that the initial results are good is a very big deal. So who knows? So far, so good.
And if we go back, all right, there are examples where libertarianism worked and is still working. All right, Hong Kong is a perfect example where they had no resources, and basically it was a free-for-all economy, and it became very wealthy till they gave it back to the communists. And then Singapore, I would argue, is a place where that has happened. And you could even make the argument of Monaco, but Monaco is a place where people with already had money just fled to not have to pay taxes. But this was the function of democracy in America, having these states as the laboratory for all these ideas, and then the good ideas would win out over the bad ideas, and the good ideas would be implemented. But somehow we've gone totally astray. And yet these small Latin American countries have picked up the gauntlet, and they're actually doing kind of living the American dream, if you will. You know, it's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. And, the earlier version of the United States was closer to the libertarian ideal just because government was so much smaller. If government is 10% of the economy, then 90% of the economy is largely operating on its own, right? Just free people pursuing their own dreams. But when the government gets up to 40, 50% of the economy, then, that the whole free individual idea becomes an ideal that doesn't actually happen in real life. And that's where we are now in the U.S. The government has gotten more and more powerful over time and gotten bigger and bigger. But see, when it crashes, when we have the currency crisis and the debt bust and all these things that we're headed for at an accelerating rate, then one of the things that will become conventional wisdom is that we can't have a government this big because we can't afford it. And so we have to shrink it in order to not continue to take on debt that bankrupts us again. So that's going to open up a lot of rhetorical space or ideas for getting by with a smaller government. And, that's going to be fascinating. We got to stay healthy, Kerry, so we can participate in that when the time comes.
Hey, I never thought I would live to see this, John. I really never thought I would, but here we are, and it's pretty darn exciting.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we're barely seeing it now, though, because the countries that are doing it are not they're not globally consequential or anything, but they're interesting laboratories for this stuff. So, here's hoping that the results are good enough that they're not discredited. Yeah. And if it's debatable 2 years from now how these countries are doing, that'll be good enough. That means that everybody's system is debatable all around the world. And then here we've got a couple of libertarian ones that are doing at least as well as some others. So that's a very big deal if it happens.
Hey, big deal, a big deal. Well, there's still other things happening in the world, even though it's hard to believe. Hey, so the AI bubble. But in theory, AI, artificial intelligence, is unlimited. So the bubble could be unlimited, right?
Well, boy, this just came out of nowhere, didn't it? AI was a concept 2 years ago, and then it became a reality almost instantly. It's amazing. When you combine artificial intelligence, which is now basically increasing in power exponentially, with quantum computers, which is another thing that's apparently coming along pretty quickly, in which computing power is not just orders of magnitude, but whatever comes after orders of magnitude, faster and more accurate than what we have. So you've got AIs operating with basically brains that are strongly superhuman, So the world is going to get very interesting very fast. But the AI bubble, though, in the stock market is one of those things that is not just going to be linear or exponential or anything like that. It's going to burst because bubbles burst. And right now, you've got the AI mania pulling up the NASDAQ and by extension, the S&P 500. But there's not very many companies doing that. There's like 10 companies. You take them out of the S&P 500. Well, okay, leave them in the S&P 500, and the S&P 500 is at all-time high. You take them out, and it's in a bear market. Those companies mean so much to the overall stock indexes, and that's a sign of the end of a cycle. When the leadership of a market is so narrow that it's literally something you can count on two hands, then that's the end of the cycle. And this time it's narrower and more richly valued than it was in 1999. So we basically, while we weren't looking, a new tech bubble blew up. That's the biggest tech bubble of all time. So that means the bust will be commensurately huge when the time comes.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you there, John. It's hard to assess these things until after the thing blows up. And remember, we talked about it many times, very hard to know you're in a bubble until after the bubble bursts, right? I mean, that's what we really see over and over again, where, Greenspan, no, we're not in a bubble. We're not in a bubble. And the next thing you know, yeah, maybe we are in a bubble, right?
Yeah. That's the people who are benefiting from the bubble choose not to think of it as a bubble. And the people who missed it tend to see it really clearly as a bubble. So,
Yeah.
and I'm definitely in the camp of people who missed the AI bubble. But, bubbles always burst. We've seen so many of them. So, over the past 40 years, they've all bursted. And this one is, in its form, no different than any of those other bubbles. You've got massive valuations. Well, this time, it's different because it's part of the everything bubble. Because there's a housing bubble. At the same time, there's the AI bubble. And commercial real estate was sort of kind of a bubble for a little while. Now it's bursting. And so, and of course, government bonds were a massive bubble, in the sense that negative interest rates, by definition, are a bond bubble. So we have so many bubbles going on at the same time that the AI bubble may not even be the biggest one, but it's definitely the most spectacular. And then, cryptos. You could argue that $50,000 Bitcoin, is it back to being a bubble again? So this is a crazy world. And once they start popping, I don't know. I don't know how one bubble survives if the others start to blow up. And I don't think that's.
Well, no.
I think one will burst, whichever one it is, and it'll take the rest of them down.
Yeah,
right.
They'll all go. When one goes, they all go. Right. I think that
almost certainly. I don't think there's any way around it.
Yeah.
But it's so hard to know which one is first.
Yeah. Well, you'll know when they go, though, right? There won't be any question about it. When they pop, they pop, and they always do. Right?
I really want to be short the NASDAQ when this happens, and that hasn't worked so far in the past year. But
remember, the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent.
Yep.
Right?
Oh, yeah, I found that out a few times in the flesh. But shorting NVIDIA is the kind of the knee-jerk obvious thing, but that is just too crazy dangerous because you just don't know how far the AI bubble is going to run, like you said. But shorting the NASDAQ is a little easier because then you don't need NVIDIA to collapse if Apple, iPhone sales slow down and their new virtual reality thing doesn't work out, and Google has a Bud Light moment with its new AI, and everybody starts leaving.
Did you see that about?
That was hilarious.
I mean, it won't do a picture of a happy white couple, right? I mean, what's that about?
So they built extreme woke into an AI, and then released it in the world. I would just like to know, what their thought process was leading up to that. Like, did they think it was going to convince everybody that was actual reality and convert the world to not that point of view?
It's insane.
Yeah, or do they think nobody would notice? See, those are the two things that at least make sense as a belief, but they're both crazy, right? They're both, it's hard to imagine that anybody, especially people working for a corporation, would have thought either of those things. But those are the only two explanations, because they couldn't have thought that they were doing something that was unassailable, that it was just exactly the right way to do it. They were working an angle here, but I just don't know what the angle was, and they blew it big time. I mean, that was super, super humiliating for them to have the whole world going, whoa, what a, bullshit, woke AI. What did you do? It's your Bud Light moment. And
Danger, Will Robinson.
That cannot be pleasant for the guys at Google right now.
Yeah, will it be go woke and go broke, right?
Well, it definitely hurt their brand to do something this blatantly weird, right? So the question is, does it matter to something like Alphabet that has multiple billion income streams? Or is it something that that does matter because its stock price is so richly valued? I don't know. We'll see.
I think that
It's just a weird
that
thing.
because arguably it's a bubble too, right? I mean, it's done nothing but go up all these years, right?
Yeah. I heard an interview with Bill Ackman, the hedge fund guy, a while ago. He was saying he's long Alphabet because its valuation has moved into a range that he thinks is acceptable. So I don't know. And it's possible that they grew so much. They grew into their PE ratio or something, but I don't know.
So I have to just recount a great story here. Maybe there is a blowback happening. They found some interview I did 2 or 3 years ago that was talking about the global health issue, but not in any objectionable means whatsoever. And they cited it and they suspended it. And I clicked the appeal button and I won the appeal, John. I actually won the appeal. That's never happened before in my life.
So how do you
been an appeal?
How do you think their appeal process works? You think it's humans, or do you think it's their AI? Because if it's their AI,
it's got to be their AI.
But that AI would not have sided with you in the appeal, right?
It's got to be their AI, right? It has to be. But yeah, how could I win if it makes no sense, right?
It could be that they're just coming to realize that the psychological and political tide is turning now. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to adapt to it. Have you seen any interviews with Jamie Dimon lately?
Yeah, he's been sounding like a regular MAGA guy.
He sounds like he's going to run for president on the Republican Party ticket. Yeah, well, I mean, he sounds like he's preparing for something like that. I actually don't think he would do it, but that saying things like what he said is what you would do to prepare the ground for something like that. In other words, he was saying, yeah, Trump was right about this and Trump was right about that. We need to respect his voters and stuff. So I think that's another sign that the political tide is turning and some big players are trying to get on board with what they see as an evolving collective consciousness in the U.S. That it's no longer tolerable to be hyper woke for a growing number of people. Yeah. And so the marketplace of ideas is having to adapt to that. So that's good. That means this thing was kind of a temporary derangement of the system instead of a really profound cultural change. It's going to go on and be permanent. Yeah.
From your mouth. Hey, speaking of which, we should talk about this, even though it's political and this is a family show. We don't usually talk about it, but Trump's judgments there in New York. Now, this happens to be a topic that I know a little something about, having practiced law in New York for 30 years and run a legal printing company where we were filing appeals to the appellate division. So you lose in the Supreme Court, and then you have the appellate division of the Supreme Court. And in Manhattan, that's the first department. Okay. And that's your appeal of right. Every case can be appealed there. And then when you lose there or you get reversed there, then you appeal to the Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in New York State. So the way it works is if you get a money judgment against you, all right, you have 30 days to file a notice of appeal. Basically, enforcement can begin from the day that judgment is entered. However, you can either do one of two things to stop a judgment from being enforced. And in this case, seizure of his buildings, his properties, is the enforcement that she's threatening. Number one is you can pay the money into court for the judgment. So you write a check, $400 million, you pay it into court, and then while the appeal is underway, the money isn't touched. Okay, and the other way you do it is through a surety, an insurance company or a bonding company, and generally ordinary people put up 10% That's the cost of the bond. In this case, he would have a surety, and those are generally licensed insurance companies in New York State, and he would agree with them what their fee would be, which probably in his case going to be 1 or 2%. And he could also put up a letter of credit. So, all this talk about seizure, that's one thing, but that's just not going to happen because he's going to appeal it. Same thing with the other case, the defamation case, where he got an $84 million judgment against him. And these judgments, normally the courts are not going to allow judgments these size. In this case, the business case, the $400 million, I think there's really good grounds for reversal, vacating it. But the backlash that's happening with truckers saying they're not going to go to New York City, I don't know if that's real or not, because most truckers in their right mind don't want to go to New York anyway. It's such a big hassle. They get premium pay for it. But if 10%, 15%, John, decide they don't want to go to New York City, that's going to have dramatic effects upon the New York City economy.
Oh, yeah. Well, these verdicts are clearly politicized, and they'll be reversed out more than likely. But here's what's funny about this. The strategy on the part of the Democrats was that, well, we tie Trump up in court so he can't campaign. He's going to be sitting in court all day long, and the publicity is going to be terrible and everything. But the way it turned out was that Trump goes to one of these court hearings, then he goes out to the courthouse steps, surrounded by reporters, and he makes a campaign speech. So it's actually better as far as campaigning goes for him to go to court, come out, because, if he goes to the state fair in Boise, Idaho or something like that, some people see him, but it doesn't make the nightly news. But he stands on the courthouse steps in New York and makes his speech, and it's everywhere. Everybody sees it. So he's actually getting more campaigning done under all these politicized lawsuits than he would otherwise, or at least more exposure. So it's actually
absolutely right.
Everybody who sees it comes to the conclusion that it's politicized. So the percentage of people who think he's being unfairly persecuted goes up with time with each of these court cases. So they're actually helping him. That's the point, and it's probably physically easier for him to spend the day, sitting in court than make a speech afterwards than it would be to travel to 5 different places to make stump speeches. So it's actually easier on him physically, and it's working for him politically. Unintended consequences. They're everywhere.
This is the craziest thing. And, all these cases appear to be blowing up. And, the closer we get to the election, for this strategy to work, they needed to eliminate him 6-8 months ago. But now you can't, in the United States, I don't see it, convict your principal opponent in the upcoming election and sentence him to jail 6 months before the election. I mean, how do you do that? I just don't see it, John. Highly
unlikely. You're right. So what they're going to do instead, I'll just say it, because you saw that Mike Benz interview with Tucker Carlson, probably, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because basically what they will do, based on what he said in that interview, what they'll do is they'll just steal the election again. So, they're trying to get Trump thrown into jail. That's not going to work. So their fallback is, well, one of two things. One is you start some kind of a war, or a major false flag of some sort that makes the election all about not changing horses in the middle of the stream, things like that. Or they just flat out steal the election. So that's the strategy. And then now, you got Republicans talking about, well, if they're going to do it, we're going to do it. And so now the Republicans are going to do vote harvesting and stuff like that too. So it might just be whoever's better at stealing elections, it will be the next president. That's how it's going to work out.
Oh man, you're so cynical, John. Cynical. But speaking of cynical, so what about these interest rates?
Yeah. Funny, the interest rate was supposed to come down. The Fed funds rate and the 10-year Treasury yield were supposed to be falling hard by now. leading up to the election because it's an election year.
Right.
Yeah, we got a couple of inflation numbers that went in the other direction. The CPI for services core index, which is pretty obscure, but it went up by an annualized rate of 8% just lately. And then the PPI services went up dramatically too. So now the Fed can't cut interest rates with any inflation measure rising at an annual rate of 8%.
Right.
So they're making hawkish noises now, like they're not going to cut interest rates at all for a long time. And the 10-year Treasury yield dropped from 5% to 3.80. Then now it's back up to 4.30, which means the mortgage interest rate is up above 7%, which means the housing market is frozen and will continue to be frozen until prices drop by 40 or 50%. So it's a mess out there when the Fed tightens and then doesn't immediately turn around and loosen again, because we're just going to have tight money for a while, it looks like.
It certainly would appear to be the case, wouldn't it?
And the only reason the stock market is up now is because of AI, right? Because if you've got the Fed talking about higher for longer and the 10-year Treasury yield going up by 20 or 30 basis points, that's bad for equities. That would normally give us an equities bear market. But thanks to AI, stocks are up at the same time interest rates are up. So that's unusual.
Because historically, when the Fed cut, all you had to do was track the discount rate, and you knew when the Fed raised rates, recession, stocks go down. When the Fed cuts rates, stocks go up.
With a lag in each case.
Yeah,
wait a few months after before this, and then.
But that was kind of a foregone conclusion, right?
Yeah.
Now, not so much.
Well, now you have so many cross currents out there because we've got the AI bubble and we've got crazy geopolitics right now. And we've got a really contentious election going on right now. And, there's apparently a lot of cash on the sidelines, in part because the government is earning such massive deficits. There's more money in the system than you would normally think with interest rates going up. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening. And in the end, fundamentals will win out, but not quite yet, it looks like.
Hey, the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. And never forget it, right? Hey, so gold is like kind of holding steady. It looks like it's in a holding pattern above 2,000. It had that one dash below. You could see that they're setting it up to kind of see. You'll have these tests of 2,000. Maybe it'll go below for a while, but 2,000 looks like that's it.
Well, so far, so good. That's been support for a couple of months. And the longer it stays support, in other words, the longer gold doesn't go down and stay down below 2,000, the more we start to trust it. And that's not bad for the gold mining stocks because this was earnings season. So a lot of the big gold miners reported. And they had generally okay earnings because their wage costs were up, energy was a little more expensive, but gold was higher. It was high enough to give them wider margins and better earnings and more cash flow. So I think the miners are the big beneficiaries of gold staying above 2,000 for a while because it allows us to build higher levels of cash flow into our projections for the gold miners and maybe makes them more interesting investments. Stanley Druckenmiller, the big hedge fund guy, just sold some tech stocks and bought some gold miners, which is highly unusual out there, So that's
it.
Yeah.
All right.
See that?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Okay, I was just going to say that potentially gives more people permission to buy gold miners because somebody like that is doing it.
True. All right. Well, that is it for today. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. Make sure you go over to John's Substack, RubinoSubstack.com, and sign up for his newsletter there and his prolific writing, and sign up for our newsletter, FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com. John, good catching up, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Kerry. See ya.
Thanks for listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, your solution to today's trying times. For the latest, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.